So this revision video is looking at London by William Blake. The poem describes Blake's impression and opinions of London as he walks around his city. He hates the effect of the Industrial Revolution in England and describes the city and its people as ailing and corrupt, with industrialisation promoting unfair laws of poverty, property, child labour, disease, immorality and prostitution. A bit of background to the poet. Blake lived in London and he had a good knowledge of what was happening in 18th century London. As the church refused to help the children that suffered, especially the homeless, the poor and those forced to work, he lost his trust and belief in religion, and this can be seen through his discussion in the poem. Throughout the whole of England, the Industrial Revolution was taking place where more people were moving to the cities looking for work, and Blake again is quite critical of this attitude towards the Industrial Revolution throughout this poem. The poem begins by criticising the property laws whereby all the streets and buildings are owned, and whereby even the river, often a symbol of freedom and life, has rules governing who can use it. Stanza 2 continues to emphasise the effect of such restrictions on the unhappy people who live in London, by describing the sound of their misery. Stanza 3 expresses Blake's aversion to the harsh treatment of child chimney sweeps, which even the church ignores, and refers indirectly to the political revolution in France, which may impact even on British politics. Blake ends by highlighting the ruinous consequences of sexually transmitted disease, which was rife in the capital at the time. The poem is written in four-line stanzas called quatrains, with alternative lines rhyming. The metre, predominantly iambic tetrameter, creates a tightly structured poem with a sense of entrapment. The heavy beat sometimes falls on the first syllable of the line to place extra stress on a particular word. Marks in line 4 and blasts for line 15, for example. The second stanza, however, never changes from its remorseless pounding iambic metre. So now we're going to have a look at some of the stanzas in more detail. So if we have a look at stanza 1, we can see that it's quite a negative start that Blake gets off to. As he talks about the idea of the Thames flowing, think about what that word implies and how that can link to his ideas. When he goes on to talk about a mark in every face I meet, marks of weakness, marks of woe, think about the connotations of the word mark. And those two words there at the end beginning with W, weakness and woe, what do those words tell us about life in London? And why does Blake begin them with the W? What effect does that sound have? Think about this stanza and where there is conflict. Think about the social context and the time that Blake was writing in. The second stanza, you can pick out the language technique of repetition, that idea of every cry, in every infant, in every voice, and the idea that what Blake is talking about applies to all the inhabitants of London. The word ban is quite significant as it shows that imposed by those in power, and it's a restriction on the people, so it sets up the conflict between those in power and those who live underneath them. The idea of the freedom of thought is being taken away in that final line, the mind-forged manacles, it's the idea that the people's thoughts are being chained up and restricted. The restrictions put in place in the 18th century and the Industrial Revolution mindset, the idea that these people did not have the freedom to think and act as they liked. Stanza 3 is where we get the poet's personal views reinforced again in this stanza. It starts off with the repetition of the image of child labour, referring to the chimney sweepers. Now the chimney sweeps were usually children who were orphans and they were in the care of the church. But in Blake's view, the church was not taking good care of these children. He refers to the blackening church. Now the idea of blackening could be talking about the soot that's on these chimney sweepers, but it could also be used as imagery for describing how the church was turning away from the purity and the goodness and going towards the darkness associated with the colour black, possibly becoming evil for not protecting the children. There's also a metaphor at the end of this stanza where he said about the hapless soldier's sigh runs in blood down palace walls, and this suggests an image of a discontented soldier, powerless in a situation that demands violence and bloodshed. He has been conscripted, probably against his wishes, and it's likely he will forfeit his life. His sigh enforces the hopelessness of protecting a monarchy and aristocracy of which he doesn't agree with, and that image of the blood running down referring to his sigh again underlines the violence that can be occasionally seen in this poem, and again links to that idea of power and conflict between those in charge and those who are underneath them. Stanza 4 is where Blake talks about the influence of the prostitutes on London life and how they are ruining his city by transmitting their sexually transmitted diseases. He talks about how they are cursed in their life and they're destined to spread around disease and suffering to everyone. There's quite a powerful image that he ends on with the idea of the marriage hearse. This oxymoron of putting the idea of marriage, which is something that's meant to be positive and happy and cheerful, next to the idea of a hearse, which is an image of death, relates how the prostitutes are potentially ruining, plaguing all these marriages by going around and spreading their STIs throughout the city. It's quite a bleak and negative way to end the poem, which again shows how Blake is almost in despair at what is happening in his city and how there is little that he can do himself to stop the misery that is being spread around. Final task then for you to do once you've listened to this video is just to do a quick summary of each of the stanzas. I'm giving you an example there for stanza 1, so read over all 4 stanzas again and just make a note of what the writer's key ideas are, pick out some of the key words and language features in them and just write up now some of your own revision notes for each of these stanzas. Thank you for listening. I hope you have found this revision video useful.